Thank you for having me. It's an honor and a privilege. Chairman Kassar, my friends from Onondaga County, other elected officials from across the state. To give everybody a little bit of background, I know you heard from two of my colleagues yesterday, County Executive Blakeman and County Executive McLaughlin. There's 62 counties in the state of New York when you count the 5 boroughs of New York City. And there's only 18 county executives, different forms of county government. And right now, the Republicans, with partnership with the Conservative Party, I believe we have 11 out of the 18. And the two biggest ones, with certainly Long Island, with winning the Suffolk County executive seat, which is really critical for the long-term trajectory of our party to be competitive. Certainly County Executive Blakeman, I think, has his re-election race this year. But in Onondaga County, we're the 6th largest county. So outside of the 5 boroughs, it goes Suffolk, it goes Nassau, it goes Erie County, it goes Westchester, Monroe, then Onondaga. We're in the middle of the state. And I've had the privilege of being on the New York State Association of County Board of Directors and also the vice chair of the County Executive Association. So even though we represent Central New York and the bedroom communities surrounding us in Onondaga, I have a really good familiarity with the issues impacting all of us at the state of New York. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight today is kind of the story that we've been living through. Literally the greatest site selection process in the history of the United States, winning a historic investment, the largest private sector investment in the history of New York State, and the largest private sector investment in the history of the country in one community. And what I thought I would go through is what that process was, what happened. Like everything in politics, once you have success, success has many authors. And I know there's some statewide politicians that took a lot of credit for what I'm going to report today, but I can tell you failure only has one. And if this all failed, you'd be looking at the author. It's an amazing story. What we're going to do to execute to make sure that Central New York becomes the hub for memory technology manufacturing in North America, and some of the lessons learned. One of the things that when you're going through this selection process is you're competing. And we were competing with regions of the country that have had a tremendous amount of success, really at the expense of New York State. We beat out Phoenix, Arizona. We beat out Austin, Texas. We beat out Raleigh, North Carolina. We beat out a site that sat between Chicago and Milwaukee, 2 major metros. And so everybody wants to know, how'd you do it? We're going to tell you how we did it, and kind of the lessons learned, and what at the state level, what needs to happen for New York to be competitive in this high-tech manufacturing space moving forward. And as Jason said, this is about national security, and we'll go through all that. So that's our first slide. That's the good-looking guy right there in front of you. Next slide. So Onondaga County, right? So Central New York, the Erie Canal going through our community, just like so many of yours that you represent. We were relevant on a global stage for making things. Air conditioning, the Carrier Corporation, invented in Onondaga County. That technology went to the south, and to the demise of the Northeast, so did people as soon as you could live there. But we really started to look over the last 10 years. Jason referenced I got involved in politics at 25. I was a Syracuse City Councilor, went over to become the chairman of the County Legislature, then the County Executive in 2018. But over this time, we saw a lot of our traditional manufacturing, from Carrier to GM to Chrysler, all leave. And we really looked at some of the legacy technologies that we had in defense and aerospace and radar, and how could we rally around a coherent strategy to try to become a high-tech manufacturing community once again. And we started to work together, and we started to really build up our assets, our community assets, tell a community story, and we started to have success. Next slide. So this is where we are. If you look at where we are in the middle of the state, we're a 3-hour drive from New York City, essentially from Boston, from Toronto, Montreal, Philadelphia. Logistically, it makes a lot of sense where we are. In addition to that, you'll see that Lake Ontario is right there. The first county executive in Onondaga County made an amazing decision in the 1960s and worked with Oswego County, and we have a direct pipeline of water from Lake Ontario into our community in addition to other water, and that's critical to this story. When you look at over to the right, that's the county by itself. The city of Syracuse, one of the big 5 cities in New York State, certainly 15 miles away is where the Micron campus will be. We're a community of about 476,000 people in Onondaga County. When you incorporate the bedroom counties next to us with Cayuga and Madison and Cortland and Oswego, we're about 850,000 people. Racial makeup, 78.8% Caucasian, 12.6% African American, 6% Hispanic, 4% Asian. Next slide. So here's kind of the timeline, and we'll get into the timeline for this. Mind you, when this all started, the governor was Andrew Cuomo, the president was Donald Trump. You had different majorities, right? And so that's when this started. In 2017, I was chairman of the legislature. I know our current chairman, Tim Burtis, is here to my left. I had his job, and we were really pushing this site that we had. It was a greenfield site that was really dormant since 2000, the late 90s. And we were seeing success with the semiconductor industry in New York State. Governor Pataki and his team, many of them are here, remember putting together the Global Foundries deal in Saratoga right here. What that did for this community and the investment. IBM legacy in the Hudson Valley, now on Semi. You had these bones. The Albany Nano Center here, which you probably drove by depending on which way you came in, that's a huge piece of educational infrastructure where we're quite competitive. And in Utica, in Marcy, New York, in Oneida County, where you have the legacy Rome Air Force Base, they had a site, and they were getting close to getting a semiconductor investment. And that was important to us because we knew the state had pumped a lot of money into Marcy. And how this works is if the state's put money into something, they're going to want to see success there before they ever even listen to your story. So we knew that, and we made a strategic decision, which I would encourage all local leaders to make, is that we were not going to outsource our economic development future to the state of New York. The state of New York has many regions. They have many different political influences, and their interests aren't necessarily yours at any given moment in time. And so we went through our own benchmark study. We went through a mock site selection process. Our site actually graded very well in this mock site selection process. And so that was really important. When you look into 2019, I'm county executive now, we're starting to make investments in our site. We're starting to get what you call shovel ready. And at the local level, we're doing that. We're getting the design done. We're understanding the power needs, the wastewater needs, the water needs, and things are happening. And sure enough, we get our first real look. In 2019, all these big projects have project names, and they're really cool names. And they, we get a company coming in. They come in. We're not supposed to know who the company is, but they give us the business card. And it is TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor Company. And we start the process with TSMC in 2019, and we're going through it, and we continue to make the next round and the next round, and they want to know about your site. They want to know about your workforce capacity. Can you produce the engineers? Can you produce the technicians? If my employees come here, what are they going to do? And those are all really important questions that, as a community, you need to answer. Later on, 2020 happens, and there is a virus that comes from a lab in Wuhan, and it shuts down the entire country. At that point, our roles as executives became leading the public health response for our local community. And one of the lessons learned there immediately, as our state, our country was struggling, not knowing what was in store for us in the early days, we immediately saw the supply chain disruptions. And we immediately learned how dependent we were on foreign supply chains, specifically our country's biggest adversary, and some would suggest enemy, and I think that's getting closer and closer by the day with China. And that lesson that we learned made us even more bullish on what we were doing, because we knew that the supply chains of the moment were looking at things like pharmaceuticals and PPE and ventilators, but we knew that moving forward, those supply chains for high-tech manufacturing would be critical, and there would be an opportunity to repatriate this type of job. In 2020, later on, we're out of that first wave of COVID and starting to get our head above water. We get a call, and we get a call from TSMC. And they let us know that they're choosing Arizona to make an investment. And so we do our postmortem on the call, and give me lessons learned. What could we have done better? Why'd you pick Arizona? And really, there was a couple reasons. One, direct engagement from their governor. Their governor at the time was Doug Ducey. He went directly to Taiwan, met with the company, and did the things they needed to do. In addition to that, the second thing was our site wasn't big enough. It was a 300-acre site. It wasn't big enough because if they were going to invest in the United States, they were going to do it in a multi-year approach. For me, that was a devastating phone call. The project was a $10 billion project. You can imagine in this role, if you ever have a chance to win a $10 billion project, if you would ever see another $10 billion project. And, after the phone call, I started to panic. I started to swear. I started to throw things. And I'm thinking through my head, and this is the God's honest truth. I'll tell you part of this story. I love this story. So I know there's many Irish people in this room. I'm Irish. And every Irish family has one person, at least one, maybe, but most just one that really made it big and really, really successful. And so, I got Irish on my dad's side, my grandpa's side, I got Irish on my grandma's side. There's just a lot of us. And my grandmother passed away when I was a baby, so I never really knew that side of the family as well. But I knew there was somebody who did really good. So I call up my dad, literally after I get the call from TSMC. And I go, Dad, the big project I've been working on, the semi-conductor company, we didn't win, And I'm like going on, and I'm like, look, who is the cousin who did really well in the Silicon Valley? And my dad's like, oh, it's your cousin Bob. Bob's, Ryan, Bob's mom was best friends with your grandma. You know what we used to do as kids? I'm like, Dad, I'm good. Like, what's Bob's last name? And it's because I know it wasn't McMahon. So I literally have in my Google on my desk, Bob, right? I'm waiting for the last name to press enter. And he goes, it's your cousin Bob Swan. So I put in Swan, press enter, and I knew the name. And I was like, Dad, you have to be shitting me. Bob Swan, CEO, Intel. Dad, I'm competing for a semiconductor company, and my cousin is the CEO of Intel from Syracuse, New York, Corcoran High School. Like, what is wrong with you? And I can't get over it. I literally can't. And he's laughing, and he goes, Ryan, Bob's brother works for you. And I was like, oh my God. So I have a workforce of about 3,500 people. And so I look up Swan, right? And sure enough, he's in my purchasing department. So I call him, and I'm like, Jim, Ryan, and this is his boss's boss's boss. And he's like, well, what can I do for you? And I'm like, Jim, are you kidding me? Your brother, Bob Swan, is the CEO of Intel, and you don't think this is something I'd want to know. And he's laughing and laughing, and I'm yelling. And he's like, look, if Bob Swan calls you, and are we cool? I go, if I got a call from Bob Swan, we're cool. And so I kid you not, probably 10, 15 minutes later, I'm getting a call from Phoenix, Arizona on my cell phone. And it's Bob Swan, my favorite cousin, the CEO of Intel. And he's mad. He's mad because you know what? Intel, they have a big presence in Oregon. They got fabs in New Mexico, but their high-tech manufacturing with their latest technology is in Phoenix, Arizona. And TSMC is a competitor. And they're coming into Phoenix, Arizona, right, creating this cluster. So he's mad. He's mad at the governor. He's mad that TSMC is coming. They're going to take my workforce. It's going to cost us money. And he's right. And then he's like, well, wait a minute. They were looking at you. And I said, yeah. And he says, what do you got? And we told him what we had. And at that point, my favorite cousin said, Ryan, we're not going to talk again because there's no conflict here. But in the event that we look to do a project in the United States and we're looking at something, we can't have my board of directors say no because you're picking your cousin's site. So Bob and I didn't talk again until later on in life, but we started working with the Intel Corporation. And this was a really important thing. This was our second validator. Again, this is in 2020. The CHIPS and Science Act, all this momentum hadn't yet started. And we kept working with Intel, and every month we would have a call, and they'd test us, and they'd test us, and then the conversation would go, well, we don't think this will work. I say, what do you mean it won't work? They're like, well, the site's not big enough. I was like, it was big enough last month. Well, what do you need? And, well, we need another 200 acres. So I would go buy another 200 acres. And then I would get an editorial by the newspaper telling me I'm an idiot for keeping buying more land. And then our next call would happen. They say, this project, the site just doesn't work for the project. And I'm like, well, what do you need? Well, we need a 1,200 acre site. And I'm like, oh. And so we had about a 500 acre site. So I started looking at how we would put together the 1,200 acres for Intel, because their project went from a 2-fab project to a 4-fab project. And that ran into one little problem there, is that for me to make a 1,200 acre site, I had to buy a neighborhood. And so I had to negotiate with 40 different homeowners. And so understanding the opportunity we had and the validation that we had from our benchmark study, from TSMC being a semifinalist, from our own experiences with having to repatriate supply chain, and now the Intel Corporation, I knew we had something. And so I bought the neighborhood. And it was painful, and went through the process, and we bought properties from 40 different homeowners, overpaid drastically for them, but it all worked out. From the Intel project, the Swan leaves, Pat Gelsinger becomes CEO. He's from Ohio. And we have a governor at the time who all of a sudden had to resign in disgrace. So those two factors changed our deal with Intel. We then got put in a hard second to Ohio. They wanted to see if they could make some things work in the Ohio site, which probably didn't have the ability to do 4 fabs. And now looking at where we are today, what our beliefs were true. But at the same time, we're starting to see the momentum with CHIPS and Science. And other companies are looking to get in the game and repatriate. And one of the things, though, even though the CHIPS and Science Act was signed under the Biden administration, the early architect of it was Wilbur Ross, Donald Trump's Commerce Secretary. And so people forget that actually that started under Trump. And then eventually we're working hand in hand with Micron and a couple other smaller projects. And certainly we went through with Micron a year-long negotiation, which is quite memorable. Next slide. Quick timeline on the White Pine site. This is what made us unique, right? These site selection processes for a mega project, first thing is site. If you don't have a site that has unique capabilities, you don't even get a second look. The second thing is community. Think of it this way, a business's ability to develop, recruit, and retain talent. That sounds easy, but that's really complicated. You need a workforce strategy. You need a community strategy where you can help attract young people to compete. We made investments in 2016 to 2018. 2018 to 2019, we realized that we're in the game, but in order to really be in the game and make the types of investments necessary, we know some other things are going to happen. Next slide. So we knew we had to be competitive. To be competitive at the local level and not to depend on a state grant that you could wait for forever, you got to have your fiscal house in order. In 2020, during the pandemic, we took that opportunity as an opportunity to reevaluate county government. We actually got more efficient, we got more lean, we shrank county government, and then we've seen record surpluses each year from that. At the same time, we got record surpluses 6 straight years. We cut the county tax rate 35%. And so we are the lowest, we have the lowest tax rate in central New York, arguably upstate. I think we're a little bit lower than Erie County now, even though Erie County is twice our size. So they have a better tax thing. We're definitely lower than Monroe County by quite a bit. In addition to that, when I got this job, our reserves were about $60 million. Now we have over $210 million in our reserves, and that gives you the flexibility to make the key investments you have to for these types of projects. Next slide. This is just kind of a little bit of a recap of what we talked about. Intel selection 2020 going into 21, Micron selection really in 21 going through 2022. What makes our site unique and different is that we had 300 acres, we turned it into a 1,400 acre site. So that's a mega site, over 1,000 acres. Across the street from the site is a substation. And if you think of New York State, north, south, east, west, that point in the middle is that substation for the electrical grid in New York State. And so at that substation, we have the ability to power 5 gigs of power. That's enough to power all of Long Island. And so right there, the power not only is there, but it's clean and it's reliable power. So when you're talking about a semiconductor manufacturing process, that cannot go dark. They're manufacturing 24/7, critical. In addition to that, I referenced that pipeline from Lake Ontario for water. We have the ability to produce a massive amount of water in our community. In this state, that's a huge asset, and that's one of the lessons learned and why we should be bullish. With the right leadership, the state can compete. Wastewater. If you don't have wastewater, you can't make things, right? If you can't flush a toilet and you can't make things, it's hard to compete and hard to grow in a national environment. We have a tremendous amount of wastewater capacity. Where we have an advantage in our community is at the county level, we control the wastewater. So we can make large bets in one section of the community and the whole ratepayer county-wide pays for it. Whereas if a town or a village controls the wastewater, hard to make, $500, $400 million investments and not have payment shock on that system. So another key strategic advantage. Next slide. That was the day, 2022, the Micron announcement. One of the amazing things about this, right? So I'm there. Sanjay Mehrotra is our CEO. Governor Hochul becomes governor at the end of this process, and then certainly talks about this project quite a bit. Senator Schumer's there, but Senator Schumer's kind of a controversial guy. Who you don't see here? You don't see Joe Biden here. So Senator Schumer boxed out the President of the United States from the announcement, which kind of tells you where his capacity was at the time. Next slide. So what is the Micron investment? The Micron investment is a $100 billion 4-fab investment. The 4 fabs in the course of 15 years. The project will have 4 clean rooms, 2.4 million square feet of clean room. Fab 1 is where we are right now. We are going through the environmental review. We are the lead agency of the county. It's our land. We'll eventually sell half of the land to Micron, and then for the first 2 fabs, and then the other half of the land when Fab 3 and 4 are ready, we'll then sell the land to them at that point. Fab 1, with the deal with the federal government to get their grant, has to be operational by 2028. So when you think about the environmental review, we will go out with our draft environmental impact statement in March. We'll get public comment. We will have the environmental impact statement done in a decision of record in probably August, September, and then we'll start construction in November. But one of the things that lessons learned we'll talk about is the regulatory environment in this state and how it impacts big projects. Fab 2 will then begin construction right when Fab 1 is complete, and then it will be operational by 2030. The overall project will create 9,000 Micron jobs, engineers, technicians. We will have on average 5,000 to 8,000 construction workers on site for the period of 2026 to 2030. And then certainly the other two fabs, another 40,000 jobs from ancillary development and supply chains by all estimates. And again, we'll be breaking ground into November. Next slide. Micron's impact, there's been multiple studies done on this. This is the one right in the middle. Employment increase of over 44,000 jobs in central New York. Population increase of over 76,000 people. Most of that coming in Onondaga County, but certainly our bedroom communities will benefit from that population growth. This is a crazy stat. Annual increase in real estate GDP, $9.6 billion is estimated between 2025 to 2055. And obviously lots of new revenue for the state of New York, local governments with the spending power coming in and the ecosystem coming in to central New York. Next slide. Part of executing on this, we look at execution in really four different distinct buckets. One was the site, right, getting the site ready. We talked about the timeline. The two is workforce. So we have partnered with all of the universities in a Northeast consortium, universities from all your communities and all of New York to really work together to develop the talent needed for the semiconductor industry, but also this mega project, this driver. The third is supply chain. So for us to be successful as a country, and this is where certainly the Trump administration will focus a lot in, we're getting these mega projects to build chips. But what is critical is most of the supply chain for this industry is still in Asia. And they've always been in Asia, and they've never had to move. You have Taiwanese companies that started out as family businesses that have been able to service the South Korean companies, the Chinese companies, certainly the Taiwanese companies. Singapore is where Micron has most of their fabs, in Japan. So now the goal is we're getting the manufacturing into the United States, but we need to get that supply chain here as well. I've taken trips to Taiwan myself on delegations, hosted delegations from Taiwan. I was recently in Japan and back, and certainly will continue our international efforts to locate that supply chain in proximity with Micron. But these are some of the wins we've had, major wins. A lot of them have happened since the Micron announcement. TTM, $123 million expansion to make semiconductor circuit boards. In DeWitt, a town, Blue4 is a cryogenic company, quantum computing, second expansion in our community. onsemi, Hudson Valley company, big presence. They just announced a 9-figure investment coming into a clean room in DeWitt, New York as well. Some of the JMA Wireless 5G manufacturer, one of the only American 5G manufacturers. One of their competitors is Huawei in China, right? So this company is growing and growing very fast because of that space. In what is going to be made at the White Pine site is Micron's next generation of DRAM technology. So everybody is paying attention to AI. Everybody's paying attention to 5G. NVIDIA, right? You're talking about the Chinese startup trying to compete with NVIDIA. Micron chips power those applications. And when you want to think about from a global stage how important Micron is, memory technology, to our country, the only American memory technology manufacturer. When China gets mad at us, they penalize Micron, right? They don't penalize Intel. They don't penalize TSMC. They penalize Micron, right? The Chinese, Micron's competition, Hynix in Korea, but the Chinese Communist Party, the companies that they own in China, that's really the competition moving forward. So critical that we develop the supply chain to support Micron here in the United States. Next slide. The community, right? The community has to be ready to grow. The community has to be ready to lead. To do that, you need to plan. We have our comprehensive plan on. After we won this project, we have funded towns and villages to look at their comprehensive plans. How are you going to grow? Look at your zoning, look at your housing, look at where you want to see growth. Is there areas you want to see industrial opportunities so we can work for site development to recruit companies there? Next slide. We are very much like New York. We have a big 5 city. We have 19 towns, 15 villages. We have rural communities. We have affluent suburbs, and we have poor suburbs. So when you look at our plan that we do, we think this plan actually works really well for New York State to create density through developing through your centers, right? Your key components in your downtowns, your city, your villages being small cities, to cluster development so you don't jeopardize the character of neighborhoods. Housing in neighborhoods, we are experiencing some of the housing challenges just like everybody else. There's no inventory. Costs are high. We're traditionally a single-family community. We recognize now with population growth, we're going to have to learn more from New York City and some of the boroughs on how they've done this. And certainly looking at an all-of-the-above housing strategy. Greenways and blueways. We have some of the best greenways and blue spaces anywhere in the country. In this whole process, I've got to travel the country. I've got to see the best and the brightest each community has. We compete very well in New York State. Mobility, we need to figure out how we move people. We need to figure out how we fund critical infrastructure. This will be a challenge in Onondaga County, serious challenge down in the suburbs and certainly in the city. And then we can't forget our roots. Agriculture, we're an agricultural state still. I know downstate, we don't think of ourselves that way, but we are. And one of the lessons that we're talking about is supply chain. A community that makes their own food is not reliant on foreign supply chains. That's really, really important. We need to continue to make investments in agriculture, ag tourism, and certainly manufacturing. Next slide. This is a quick one. This is just a wastewater map showing one of the key advantages we have to other communities. Our ability to spread costs, make strategic investments to support community growth and industry. Next slide. When it comes to site selection, we talked about site, we talked about community. The third thing's money, right? The reality is that you're competing. And you're competing at the local level, local to local, at the state level, state to state. And quite frankly, where the CHIPS and Science Act came in and the investment tax credit, that's really important that Congress passes the extension on, maybe even enhancing that credit because of the cost of construction. We're competing internationally. So to win these projects, the CHIPS and Science grants, they basically offset the difference to build these facilities in Taiwan and in Singapore compared to building them in the United States. We were competing state to state. If this is a baseball game, I was the starting pitcher for 7 innings. I gave a good 7 innings. Then the 8th inning was out of my control. I cannot control the fact that it cost $5 billion more to build it in New York than it did in Texas. So the state came through. We came through with some concepts as a team. One of the concepts we came up with was something similar to the CHIPS Act. It was called Green Chips. Bipartisan vote in the Assembly and Senate. Certainly the governor will talk about that. She helped push that through. But that basically leveled the playing field with Texas. And that's important as a lesson learned if we want to get to the point where we're not creating programs for different industries. But at the local level, we have incentive programs we've created for housing, understanding that interest rates are high, inflation's high after the last 4 years. We still need the housing to get developed somehow to meet this moment in time. Next slide. That's a continuation. Next slide. So, Empire State. What I have learned from leading this selection process and now executing on making this a reality so that Central New York's the hub for memory technology manufacturing on this continent. Some important lessons. But one, I do think statewide we can have a comeback. I do think the bones are good. We have a beautiful state. We produce talent. We have some of the best higher educational assets anywhere. The SUNY system is second to none from a public standpoint. Our private institutions, the Nano Center in Albany, really key piece educational and research infrastructure, certainly really important. An abundance of natural resources, fresh water, mountains, oceans, orchards, farms, Niagara Falls, Thousand Islands, the Finger Lakes, Old Forge, the Adirondacks, the Catskills, Long Island shores. These are all things that we have. Quite frankly, most of this country is flat. They don't, right? These are things that we take for granted. We have critical infrastructure, ports, airports. When you look at certainly the LaGuardia and JFK, the Port of New York, certainly when you look at Albany, Rochester, Buffalo, Syracuse, larger airports to help us be competitive. We have great cities, towns, and villages in our state, and we do have the greatest city in the United States of America, in New York City. But to do that, some of the bullets that I think are necessary for at a statewide leadership level to be accomplished, understanding that we need to put New Yorkers first, and understanding that if we want to stop the U-Haul exodus from our state and bring people back, that has to be the focus every day. And we've seen a state government that has been more intentional in their efforts to support migrants who are here illegally than are New Yorkers. And certainly we need to look at income tax rate cuts for working class New Yorkers. The scam that I know Congressman Lawler will touch on with congestion pricing, that tax going the wrong way when you have a bloated MTA that isn't even collecting debts owed to it, to then go put a tax on hardworking New Yorkers coming to work or just traveling from one side of their neighborhood to the other is absolutely asinine. Certainly, we need to partner with local governments and not look at local governments as adversaries in this state again. The failing practice of unfunded mandates drives up costs in all of our communities. New York State should take over Medicaid from counties and in turn demand that counties give dollar for dollar property tax relief. Certainly, they should be looking to partner with local governments on things of housing, not trying to strip local control, but enhancing and supporting local governments. And certainly, many of you have probably followed the assault on counties and towns with the odd even year legislation that I successfully have led a lawsuit to date where we sued the state. We won the first round. They do this is an experiment. They do this to try to, experiment to see if they can win seats, right? This isn't about best practices. It saves no money. It will cost more money. Quite frankly, it's insulting to put some of these important executive seats on ballots competing against TV airwaves for swing congressional districts and others. It really diminishes the role that county executives and town supervisors and legislators play. We need to be more competitive in the marketplace. We need to develop more shovel-ready sites throughout the state of New York. If you don't have a site, you won't get an opportunity to compete. We need to invest in our infrastructure, our people, specifically wastewater, specifically transit infrastructure in the city of New York. The big thing and a big opportunity we have to really create jobs but really plan for the future is the acknowledgement that the state's CCLPA goals will not be accomplished. You cannot power the state of New York's grid based off of solar panels and wind farms. And we need to, we need to go back to nuclear energy. And I think that's good news for a lot of our communities. Mini nuke technology is there, but certainly Constellation in Oswego County and Wayne County, there's pads there where they can expand today. That means hundreds of good paying jobs, construction jobs. And the good news is we got a friend in Lee Zeldin and President Trump that can help cut the red tape. These projects take normally 8 years to happen, but we have the right people at the right time to really go and pivot towards that to help really power the entire state of New York moving forward. In addition to that, small businesses, we really need to focus in on eliminating the small business manufacturing tax if we want to reshore these jobs or compete with other states for these jobs. And then related to public safety, you cannot, this is just crazy to me. I think the state of New York's actually gotten off the hook with how bad their policies are in public safety because of the migrant crisis. They have created such chaos on the streets of our communities because of the migrant crisis that you can't even really focus in on the disaster that was bail reform and the major disaster that is raise the age, and where we are teaching 14-year-olds and 15-year-olds that it's okay to be a criminal with no consequences. We're telling gang members that it's okay to have a 13 or 14-year-old pull the trigger because they're going to be treated in family court, not in county court and criminal court. These are things that the state has gotten off the hook on, and if you look at the chaos that has happened because of it, we need to address it. And it's that culture that has happened that has really emphasized some of the other things that we've seen, the anti-Semitism on college campuses and in streets. We need a leadership team in Albany that's going to tackle this issue, that's going to fix these problems, or else we won't be able to meet a really moment in time where we can truly come back. But saying that, before I take some questions, I do believe I'm bullish on our bones and our fundamentals. I'm bullish on where the electorate has been waking up across our state and seeing what's been going on. I think we have great talent developing up at all levels of the state that can help really fill the next generation of leadership to kind of get us back here. If we don't, we're going to continue to bleed congressional seats and bleed influence in our nation's capital. And really, I think the moment's now. We're prepared to do our part in Central New York and to help lead the comeback for high-tech manufacturing. But I think overall, I think we can have a lot of success electorally this year, and we really need to focus in on 2026. It's going to be a critical year. Thank you.